Hello everybody, my name is Luke Marr and this is Hotla Mode, and today on Hotla Mode we are coming to you with the review of the 2021 film House of Gucci. Fortin's book was initially published in 2000 and covers the timeline of the Gucci company and family up until 2001, at least in the epilogued version. But Fortin's book also utilizes Gerald McKnight's 1987 book, Gucci, A House Divided, as heavy fodder for giving background on the Gucci family, as well as the shady and scandalous business wheelings and dealings that preceded Maurizio and Patricia's story by decades. Fortin's book currently sits at 348 pages that ties together so many people, places, and things concerning the Gucci family that it's a wonder it's not actually a longer book. But unlike Fortin and McKnight's concise accounts, Scott shamelessly cuts from one large moment to another roughly, foregoing the smooth and buttery Gucci leather storytelling ability. There is a lot wrong with the plot, in my opinion. I think we should first dive into the biggest problem with the film, which is its lack of explanation of who and what Gucci is. Now, I wasn't expecting a documentary per se, but I would hope that, we would just get a backstory maybe. The film begins with Patricia Reggiani, who will go on to be the star, obviously, but that doesn't mean that a bit of a background on Gucci wouldn't help non-fashion obsessed audience members. Guccio Gucci, who is mentioned no more than 2 or 3 times throughout the film, and I'm being generous there, was not only the brilliant founder of Gucci, but a very difficult man to appease. There could be a whole movie based on just his life, but when you factor in the fact that he had 5 children, swindled some of them out of their inheritance, and that his behaviors almost turned his children against each other, he seems like a necessary character to explain, maybe? Especially when it comes to discussing his sons Aldo and Rodolfo, who both appear heavily throughout the movie. Secondly, the movie follows 5 different main characters. The House of Gucci book again covers a vast swath of family drama stemming decades, while the movie focuses on the period starting in 1970, when Patricia and Maurizio met, and follows through to the late 1990s, ending on Patricia's sentencing. While Patricia and Maurizio feel like they are the main characters, Aldo Gucci and Paolo Gucci maintain such a presence throughout the film that it would lead one to believe they too are the main characters. And when one adds in Rodolfo Gucci, Maurizio's father, it only stokes the fires of A-list competition. This movie is truly a case of too many Michelin star chefs in a kitchen. I can't totally fault the actors when it comes to this, because each of them has taken the character in a direction they feel is right, but the plot feels that it's divided almost 4 or 5 ways, with the audience being forced to skip and jump between moments that are either entirely not true or fictionalized for drama's sake. Of course, there was quite a lot of scenes invented in order to heighten drama, which felt pointless and vapid, but also I understand why it's there. But considering the true tantalizing scandals different family members indulged in, you would presume they maybe just used those. If you haven't read the book, you might not know that there was a legitimate physical altercation between Maurizio and Paolo at a Gucci corporate business meeting, surrounded by lawyers and shareholders in the company. The fight made international headlines, and family friends of the Guccis like Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis even wrote to the Gucci seeing if there was anything they could do to help remedy the situation. Wouldn't that make for a far better and more accurate portrayal of this tense family dynamic and the campy victim persona of Paolo Gucci instead of him just pissing on a Gucci Flora scarf? I feel like there is a smarter way to showcase the breaking down of Paolo and Rodolfo's relationship, as Rodolfo was the designer of the iconic scarf, but it just felt gimmicky compared to the true moments that were just as, if not more, salacious. The combination of too many characters to focus on and too many stories invented only contributed to the orientingly long film's inability to create genuine emotional friction between the characters. It's a long movie. I thought that when I saw it in early November for like a pre-screening, that was just like, oh, we're gonna chop some bits out. No. That didn't happen. It seems that it was long throughout. We then, of course, have strife between Aldo and Paolo Gucci, and in the film, so much of the other family members are cut away, like Rodolfo and Aldo's brother Vasco, as well as Aldo's other sons, Roberto and Giorgio, whose lives were either added or subtracted to Aldo and Paolo's storylines depending on what was convenient. Why so many members of the family were kept out of the film is puzzling, as they could have actually lifted some of the weight from Aldo and Paolo, and could have given Patricia Patricia and Maurizio's lives much more time to shine. As for Patricia, the storyline tries to keep her as powerful as possible throughout the film, which doesn't do the real Patricia any justice. The Italian justice system did her enough justice, but like still. Patricia was a monster, a cold-hearted and calculated woman who used every trick in her book to make her scorned feelings known and felt, whether it was emotionally, mentally, or physically. Her storyline in the book really focuses on her ability to captivate the young and shy Maurizio, then how she becomes progressively more controlling of him after their marriage and his ascension as leader of the company. While there are moments depicting this sort of turmoil, like the physical violence by Maurizio against Patricia, and that moment where Maurizio is like, "You're not a Gucci," the side of Patricia that made her such a person of interest was her manipulation. Her use of her daughter as an attempt to get back into Maurizio's heart, her constant use of seances which scared the shit out of her in-house staff, and her legitimate threats, one including asking a servant at Maurizio's getaway home to put cans of gasoline on the side of the home, and she would take care of the rest. Where was that? Her obsession with this man was very much so legitimate. Not that she had legitimate reasons to be, but like she was legitimately obsessed. And through spies in his home staff and Gucci staff, she found out information about his finances and relationships, like with Paola Franchi, played by Camille Cotton. She also developed a brain tumor, one that doctors feared meant she only had months to live, and when she recovered, she poured that newfound energy into ruining Maurizio in whatever way she could. So like, I'm sorry, I just think my reading of Patricia seems far more interesting than the one that I watched for like 2.5 hours. Now, Patricia has a way with words and wrote voracious diary entries about Maurizio and even used tape recorders to make messages and hand deliver them to him. Hand deliver. To some, Patricia was only looking out for her daughter's futures. To others, she was truly heartbroken by Maurizio, and to the rest, she was just money hungry and desperate for power. And the film really only portrays her as money hungry and desperate for power, which again, just feels really vapid and lazy. If this is a Patricia Reggiani smear campaign, great, but I don't think that's what this is necessarily trying to be. Now, while Patricia is one of the true stars of the book and the film, Maurizio was pretty f***ed up himself, which wasn't portrayed well either. The whole relationship between Rodolfo and Maurizio was glossed over, but it holds such a powerful weight in why Maurizio did what he did throughout his life. His strict father was demanding, humiliating, and controlling, and as he got sicker, he lightened up just a bit, but this seems to be the root cause of many of Maurizio's issues. Instead of showcasing this, we just see Maurizio feign a lot of indifference about so many different things, like his business acumen, his design capabilities, and his swindling of his family members into signing away their shares of the company. Yeah, he did a lot of work to make sure that nobody knew that he was utilizing a big sort of hedge fund to buy out his family members. Like, he was kind of shisty too. The ability to add in Maurizio's real-life fiery passion for Gucci and high-roller lifestyle never really appeared, unless discussed by the corporate businessmen he goes into business with. He, like his ex-wife, could be nasty and horrible and mean, but the way he's portrayed is just rather blasé. We never see much of his trying to make Gucci cool. We see him have meetings that were inconsequential via the Anna Wintour 73 Questions segment, which, if I was Anna, I would be so offended by that portrayal. Maurizio is a deeper and more cutting character than he is made out to be, and it felt like another wasted opportunity to use him as a name dropper instead of showing more of his actual, genuine, true character. And I mean, well, the entirety of the Tom Ford scenes drove me mad, mostly because it just felt like a way to name drop famous people, so the movie would have even more buzz before it got into theaters. Tom Ford even confirmed that he knew Maurizio, but that by the time he was creative director, the late Gucci was already ousted from the company, meaning he wouldn't have attended Ford's breakthrough fall 1995 collection, nor left a lunch with the InvestCorp team just as Maurizio was about to be let go. Tom wrote all about his thoughts on the movie in an airmail, wonderfully written review. Tom Ford, at least in the story of Maurizio and Patricia, was inconsequential. Throughout their marriage, he was nothing but a lowly designer working under Don Mello, who conveniently got no mention in the film. Now, I say conveniently because Don Mello was Maurizio's ally and sparring partner when he took over the company as the solo Gucci. She also was the former head buyer at Bergdorf Goodman and pretty much was the catalyst that changed the way that Gucci was being perceived, or at least started to get the ball rolling. Tom Ford just kicked it out of the park. And my real issue is, if they had added her into the film, It would have made a clearer path as to why Maurizio was driven out of his own company by InvestCorp. But instead, we get unnecessary scenes and fictionalized quotes, which only further leads the story astray. To cap off my real issues with the plot, I read the book, and I was thoroughly confused at multiple different points in the film about what the was happening. I was like, oh, maybe that's it? Oh, okay, they're doing this section, but we skipped out a whole, important part for this random scene. They wrote a book about it. It shouldn't be that hard to adapt it into a screenplay. Isn't that kind of what Hollywood does a lot of the time? I think we should also discuss the actors throughout the film. Again, not a film critic. I have no necessary reason to judge them for their performances, but I think it's an important part. Each of them is a star in their own right, but through either poor screenwriting or direction, they each feel watered down versions of the originals. Rodolfo Gucci, as previously mentioned, was a cold and aristocratic snob who was really hard on his son in the same way his father was hard on him. Maybe explaining how Rodolfo's life choices to become an actor against Guccio Gucci's wishes could have depicted the similarities between father and son in the film. Also, all I have heard about was Lady Gaga's Italian accent in the run up to the film, but Jeremy Irons goes back and forth between a British and Italian accent that I genuinely couldn't tell if the clips of him were just him out of character and they were just accidentally placed in the final film. I understand that aristocratic Europeans would have somewhat of a British twang, maybe, to their English, and maybe Irons thought that Rodolfo's acting career would have made that more defined, but I could see how it would be an incredibly confusing thing for audience members without that background knowledge really shoved down their throats. And also, the media talked nonstop about Lady Gaga's accent, but where was the Jeremy Irons combo? We then had Aldo Gucci, who was far smarter and successful than the movie ever really gives him credit for. While yes, there was a hefty scandal revolving around his tax avoidance, which again, the lack of Italian cultural context would have easily explained. But Aldo was a brilliant mind. He understood business and brought Gucci to America, making it a hotly desired brand where his people skills, when on, were brilliant, and when off were harsh and calculating. Al Pacino, while being a legend, doesn't capture the suave and charming energy that many would remember Aldo for. In a not suave and charming way, Aldo was such a pisser, unlike his son, Paolo, that he would sometimes greet fashion editors with kisses on the lips. He didn't get the full Monty, or the Italian version of the full Monty, in the film. Al Pacino, in my opinion, depicts Aldo in a far more Italian-American way, and I grew up on Staten Island, so I know a thing or two about Italian-Americans. Instead of a European-Italian way, which allows Aldo to fall into a cheap gimmick rather than one of the strongest players in the war of the Guccis, because he was. As for Paolo Gucci, Jared Leto did him wonders. Of course, he was nowhere near as campy as Leto makes him out to be, but he still was rather odd, and at least Leto had fun with him. Again, based on the script, there were lots of moments that were devised just to add spice to the film, but considering many stories about Paolo are ones you couldn't make up, it could feel a little bit phony at times. Well, yes, the pissing on the scarf scene is good in a certain context. It's one of, if not the only scenes that Paolo and Rodolfo share, and that really is not a great way to depict the animosity between the two. There were a lot of fights in the factories, drama all around that, because the movie is trying to cater to so many different storylines, it all feels rushed, even though it was 2.5 hours long. I also want to say that Paolo wasn't necessarily a fashion designer like he is in the film. His role was more about creating a range of products like bags and strollers and other Gucci monogram products that weren't exactly runway fashion oriented, at least not at the point that he was working for the brand. Of course, for Gucci and his own Paolo Gucci brand, he made clothing, but it wasn't fashion show material like in the movie. It was more like shirts and jackets, scarves and ties. And while Gucci did make clothing, bags, luggage, shoes, and other custom-made items, which were far more profitable, Paolo's concepts that are shown to his uncle during the film feels like it's making fashion some sort of silly device for anger and strife when it really would have been a host of other things that caused such bad blood between the two. They had fights about window dressing and baby strollers, shit like that. It had nothing to do with the clothes. And again, I want to reiterate, considering Rodolfo was the one who came up with the floral scarf for Grace Kelly, the peeing on it was a good nod. only for those in the know, because what context does everybody else have about the history of the Gucci flora scarf and what its significance means if you haven't explained any of the history of Gucci? When it comes to Maurizio, Adam Driver made him completely unlikable, in my opinion. He had his flaws, which were very rarely seen in the film, and yet somehow I found him still incredibly unlikable. And I think it has to do with the monotone nature of the character from beginning to end, which was dull and felt like a watered-down version of all the different phases Maurizio went through. From the true timid nature of him around his father, to the way that he was wrapped around Patricia's finger for years, to his ascension to the company, to his estrangement and divorce, to the way that he swindles, again, his whole family out of their own company. There was minimal difference in attitude and candor. And you're making me use the word candor, Adam Driver. It almost feels like Maurizio was there as solely a placeholder for his own murder, shuffling from one scene to the next with very little emotion ever displayed. Ever. It was disappointing, to say the least. And finally, let's talk about Lady Gaga's Patricia. I think she, with the help of the script and Ridley Scott, botched the character. And I don't want to have to say that, but I do. Patricia Reggiani, who was still alive, by the way, was absolutely wasted in this capacity. Her dialogue is not dynamic, and at times nonsensical, especially when you compare how conniving and cutting she truly was. The ethical person, quote,
I don't consider myself a particularly ethical person, but I am fair.
I still don't understand. Maybe I'm the stupid one, but huh? And the most ridiculous part is the pre-movie press about Lady Gaga never meeting Patricia. At one point, Lady Gaga says, I don't want to collude with Patricia Gucci. I think she wants to drive a famous narrative of herself as a notorious killer and a woman who advised Gucci. I think what she did was wrong, and I think she deeply regrets it. And if anything, I extend my heart to her daughters. In an interview with ITV News. In reality, Patricia is a deeply profound woman, and Lady Gaga not meeting her felt like the stupidest decision of this whole film's making besides, well, making it. Why would you not go to see the person who you are portraying and gain insight into how she presents herself? On top of that, if your heart goes out to Maurizio and Patricia's daughters, because that's why we don't want to collude with her, why star in the film? Why be the face of the rehash of Alessandra and Allegra Gucci's father's murder? Well, Lady Gaga in a Good Morning America interview says, I could tell this woman wanted to be glorified for this murder, and she wanted to be remembered as this criminal. I don't want to collude with something I don't believe in. Yet you are starring in a film glorifying her, giving her snappy yet idiotic catchphrases like father, son, and house of Gucci, which you made up. And to revert back to the constant waste of brilliant and true moments from the Gucci family, the leaving out of Patricia's iconic Rolls Royce line,
it's better to cry in Rolls Royce than to be happy on a bicycle.
Was a slap in the face.
That's for sure.
Like, that was natural. That was real. Like, she said that. She said it. Why not use it? Somebody truly needs to inform me, what about this film is not glorifying this woman who committed murder? To add insult to injury, Lady Gaga told the New York Times, I started the book and it was filled with opinions, so I threw it out. But goes on to create her own Patricia persona, which one would find to also be filled with opinions on Patricia Reggiani of Lady Gaga's own making. Lady Gaga's Patricia Reggiani seems like it wants to have its cake and eat it too. She on one hand doesn't want to build a star profile for Patricia, yet stars in a profile about her. And it leaves me wondering why the film was ever even made, especially if the main actor never even read the source material. Why would you not read the source material? And maybe if she had, she would realize the whole book is based on a murder.
Judas!
I mean, the whole first chapter isn't about the history of the Gucci family or the budding relationship of Maurizio and Patricia. No, it is titled A Death, and brings the reader straight into the morning that Maurizio was murdered.
Murder!
Like, that's the whole premise of the movie. I'm sure that was the first page of the script. Maybe if she had read the book, she would have been able to create more dynamic scenes and dialogue for herself, because her portrayal of Patricia is one-dimensional at best, in my opinion. As we mentioned earlier, Patricia is seen by so many as money-hungry and desperate for power, but she also did have different motives, whether it was her daughters being financially secure and whether it was her actual true love for Maurizio. Those two things are never really expanded upon. It's just, we're gonna make this chic, fabulous Italian murder woman chic and fabulous but on the big screen. Who wouldn't have been enthralled to hear Lady Gaga say things like,
Dear Maurizio, Am I mistaken, or did you lose your mother as a young boy? Naturally, you did not have what it meant to be a father either, especially seeing how easy it was to weasel out of your responsibility to your daughters.
That's a direct quote from one of Patricia's cutting tape recordings. We think that that was not nearly as important as Father, Son, and House of Gucci. To be frank, I don't blame Lady Gaga entirely. Much of this could have been avoided if she just read the source material and at least tried to interact with the real Patricia, which Ridley Scott should have probably made her do. But Ridley Scott didn't seem to push any of his actors. They all felt like they were stars of the film, but by the end of the movie, well, none of them truly were. I could talk about the clothing of the film, but to be honest, it wasn't particularly interesting. Patrizio and Paolo have the only two intriguing wardrobes, with the latter being the more eye-catching. Paolo did have custom pieces created for himself. That was like a fun nod, but with Patricia, it was very bleak. She wore furs with salacious slip dresses underneath when she was very, very young in college. And before Maurizio truly wooed her, she was known for not wearing underwear underneath her very sheer dresses. Where was that? And as she got older and had more money, Chanel and Valentino were the everyday styles for her. And while for a time she had her own line of jewelry at Gucci, she wasn't really prone to wearing the brand much. In the film, that air of tackiness never really materialized, but rather she looked dowdy, boring, and downtrodden for the most part, which there were parts where she was in real life, but like, there was a lot of parts where she wasn't. For a movie about fashion, there wasn't much of it. I guess I'll end the review here. The film never lent itself to the true amount of drama the source material possesses. And the fact that Patricia's trial is almost entirely skipped is the cherry on top for me. How could one not depict this glamorous and over-the-top character sitting behind bars in the midst of her trial? Because yes, violent criminals in Italy at that time were held in cages during their trials. Throughout the whole movie, creative liberty was evidently taken, and yet here, that couldn't have been done? Patricia didn't actually sit in a caged cell because she just kind of paid for the violent murder, but we couldn't have had her behind bars as a way to like end the movie out. I don't know. I was excited about House of Gucci. I mean, who wouldn't be? But on so many different levels, the movie was just dull and vapid and nonsensical and probably shouldn't have really been made. If the main actor is saying, I don't want to glorify so many different elements of this storyline, then why glorify it? Why do it? Why make it happen? And if you then decide to do it, at least make the true, salacious, devious, horrific, awful storyline really jump out on screen. There are ways to depict evil, horrible things in a way that really leaves an audience feeling bad. I saw Star is Born. I know people that left the cinema hysterical crying. Where was that energy? Where was that moment? Because I didn't get it. Obviously, this is probably going to be a very controversial review. Here's my end thoughts. Just because a story is very intriguing, it doesn't mean that everybody is capable of translating that onto a screen. With that, that's the end of my House of Gucci review. I wish it was better. I really do. I wanted to love it, and there have been different fashion films and TV shows that have done really good depictions of different fashion designers and people, but this is not one of them. I'd love to know what you guys thought in the comments down below. I will see you guys in the next video, and TTYL.